Our next speaker is Dan Frye. Seems to be a pretty busy guy from just talking to him for a minute. Works at IBM, as you can tell from the laptop and the display. He co-authored IBM's original strategy papers on Linux and open source, and is the founder and director of the Linux Technology Center. So he has a lot of good things to say. So let's give a big hand for Dan Frye.
Good afternoon. We'll start with a sound check. It's okay in the back? Okay. So as the introduction went, I am the director of the IBM Linux Technology Center. I have been working full-time on Linux and open source for 5 years. If the folks in the audience were a little older, you would understand if I said that I drank the Kool-Aid on this stuff a long time ago. So for those of you who aren't old enough, that's a cultural reference for getting addicted. So the Linux Technology Center, I will talk about what we do on a day-to-day basis and technical talk, and I will slip in just by accident some of the business rationale for why we do these things and how IBM makes money, which is the point of this track. Because we do make money. Maybe I assume it's no surprise to you or to anybody that IBM is not a philanthropic organization. We exist to give value to customers and return value to shareholders, and we do that by selling stuff and making profit and paying our employees. So this is a business for us, and we started out. When we looked at this for the first time in '98, we immediately saw that there are ways to make money, a lot of money, by leveraging open source, by leveraging Linux, other open source packages. Not always directly, but there is a way to do it, and we have been doing it. So my team is the development team in IBM for Linux. We have a bunch of programmers, about 350 people in the team, although you'll see a 250 reference here in a little bit. We do 3 things. We help make Linux better. We advantage IBM products with Linux, and we try to expand the reach of Linux in terms of which markets, what technologies it's useful for. You see the big arrow. Most of what we deliver is directly to the community. We consider ourselves part of the various open source communities. The engineers on my team work directly in the meritocracy. If they do well, code gets accepted. If they write bad code, it gets flamed, rejected, just like everybody else. We have learned over time that the meritocracy is, occasionally an imperfect meritocracy, but that's okay. It's people by humans, and so it makes it interesting. We work closely, the other yellow box, the Linux distribution partners, in terms of delivery of code with SUSE, now Novell, with Red Hat, with Turbo Linux, Yellow Dog Linux, There used to be a couple hundred Linux distributions. I think it's down to 100 or so. But IBM is not in the Linux distribution business, and I'll talk about a little bit more of that. At the bottom, talk about we make Linux run across everything IBM does on the server side. All of our hardware, all of our software, all of our services, and we make money off all those things. So we really do want, the purpose of the reason why IBM invested a large amount of money just in my team, just in the Linux Technology Center, because I assure you all 350 people take home paychecks, right? So we have equipment, it costs real money. We really do want to accelerate Linux in the enterprise, to promote choice, to level the playing field. It's good. We consider it good for the IT industry, good for our customers, good for IBM. We do work as the first couple of years. Our similar charts like this said that we wanted to become trusted, valued members of the Linux and other open source development communities. It's now we want to stay as members. We do consider that we are. We work as peers in the community on an individual basis. Once again, the fact that a programmer is from IBM is is of no benefit to that programmer in gaining credibility, it is also true that it is no longer a detriment to be from IBM. So, we have a very basic strategy, and here I'll slip in a little business. So, our basic strategy from day one has had 5 basic elements. We make Linux run on all of our hardware. We do not sell Linux. Instead, we partner with the Linux distributors in order to compete against competition in the market, whether it be Sun or HP, et cetera. We put all of our software on top of it. We contribute in open source and open standards to make Linux better, to make Linux good enough for IBM customers. And then we sell the services all around it. So we make money, we deliberately make money when we sell the hardware. We sell the commercial software on top of the open source software, and then the services all around it. Some of those things that Matt talked about, we are in a mixture of those models a mixture of the different business models in terms of open source. This is a good business for IBM, continues to grow at a large rate. This is, as an industry as a whole, this is a multi-billion-dollar business, and we are getting, we are competing and doing well in each of the businesses. We're not winning in every single business. Nobody does. It's one of the benefits here of choice. There isn't any lock-in. All right. What does the team do? So we are a very distributed team. We have engineers in the team working in about 40 cities, 9 countries. We have a couple large centers, Beaverton, where I am located, in Austin. Those are places where we had world-class Unix development skills. We turned them loose in Linux, and they have thrived. We work in a number of we also support a number of the different initiatives and things going on in the industry that are somewhat of the framework that helps the various open source communities work together and help them present value to the industry. The Open Source Development Laboratory really is becoming, in some sense, the center of gravity of the Linux business community. If you saw an OSDL graphic, you would see the kernel development community at the core, and the OSDL providing the translation of the value of that to analysts or end users, to the street, to the market as a whole. Standards and a whole range of other things that we help out. And just this morning, Matt, I put your conference on this list, just so. So what do we work on? We work on, and I will tell you why we work on these things as I go through them in a little more detail. We work on all the elements of the operating system that are useful to IBM customers, right? And in general, we don't work on the elements of the operating system that are not useful to IBM customers. So we work on, and it's one of the nice things about open source, even at a corporate level, the scratch your own itch philosophy applies, right? We don't work on the parts of the operating system that serve the gaming community, for example, at a low level. IBM doesn't sell a lot of equipment in that space. We do work on, scalability. IBM customers want bigger, systems that scale better to get, a lot of performance out of all the processors they buy. Serviceability, I'll talk about this. This is an area where we don't necessarily always see eye to eye with the core community, an area we continue to debate. Security for IBM customers is huge, right? Not only security at a conceptual level, but I'll talk about this, security at an assurance level as well. And a whole range of things. So for each of these, and each of these, interestingly enough, represents different communities with different practices. Experience and expertise in working in, say, the Samba community does not necessarily, make you instantly accepted if you're want to work in the Linux core, kernel community or the Linux networking community, or in one of the Free Software Foundation communities. They're all different. One of the things we learned over the last few years is how different they really are. When we started in '98, we had this concept of we knew that there were various communities, but we assumed that open source was open source. Turns out not to be true, which makes it all the more fascinating to work in this space, because these communities are very different. By and large, we have become successful contributors, leaders, peers, et cetera, in all these various communities, with a couple of exceptions. There are a couple of communities that have been difficult for us to become peers in, but I expect eventually to crack those communities as well. And by and large, the large majority of the communities have been very receptive to IBM, been very receptive to the other large companies in terms of becoming part of the community. As long as we respect the rules, we understand how to do things, and we have been educated. We've had our fair share of code that was not quite proper for a particular community, and the communities have been universally vocal and let us know that. But we've gotten pretty good at this. So, a couple things going on. We do get lots of things accepted. This is IBM. We've got process around things, even such as open source. I made my team keep track of functional patches accepted into 2.5 as a organizational point. When I only made them do this until they got to 1,000. Then I could told them they could quit. We have many more than 1,000 actual patches accepted if you include defect patches, but we work in all elements of the kernel, and we've become very successful at being part of the open source community and contributing. And this was numerical proof. It's interesting, in 1998, when we first started thinking about Linux and open source, we asked ourselves this question: how can an undisciplined development process produce high-quality, secure code? And we came to the conclusion that it cannot. And the fallacy in the question isn't that Linux and the other open source projects are not high-quality, secure code. The fallacy in our original thinking was that the open source development process was undisciplined. It is not. It is a highly disciplined development process. It just turns out to be a different development process. Now, it's harder to get code into Linux than it is into a commercial system, where a commercial system, executives or program managers can make a decision to put things in. It doesn't work that way. You have to prove it. But there are still improvements necessary in the open source development process to make it more efficient, to make it more reliable, to make it more predictable. And the Linux community in particular has been aggressive in improving their own process. Not because there's a management team somewhere measuring them, forcing them, just because they're world-class professional software developers who understand that they can get better. 2.6 alone had a number of different process improvements that will make 2.6 a much higher quality level than 2.4, even though 2.4 was awfully good. There's testing going on. There's a large test projects going on a regular basis around 2.6. It didn't exist around 2.4, both in IBM, at OSDL, at HP, and other places, et cetera. And they're interlinked. The bug system is no longer, a note to the LKML mailing list where it may or may not get, treated. There is a formal bug tracking system that most people use, and it's gotten, things do get reported, they do get fixed, they do get verified there. Feature tracking and Frye, the community work together to get much better at this. Still not perfect, but an order of magnitude improvement over 2.4. Bitkeeper has become very useful. Although not everybody uses Bitkeeper, it drops many fewer patches on the floor. It's just a more ordered process. The Bitmover company really designed an excellent distributed source code management system. The Open Source Development Lab and all the initiatives going on there, support for the community in terms of equipment, in terms of roadmaps, et cetera. Linus and Andrew now obviously are both OSDL employees. as well. All these things help. Not only they're not only good eye candy for customers in terms of understanding how much more reliable the underlying development process is, but they're actually driving improvements. 260, when it comes out, it should come out pretty quickly, will be much, much higher quality than 240. You know, 2410 was pretty high quality, but it took a longer period of time to stabilize the system. The system will be much more stable. I have to run them for days, you know, on end in a lab environment. That was the original reason we set up OSDL, and we continue to invest in this area. It's simply beyond the capabilities of the average engineers. So where we are today, Linux is absolutely perfectly ready for a large range of workloads. If you think of the edge of the enterprise, file and print, web serving, et cetera, there are no questions whatsoever. There are none of those workloads that Linux can't work well. If you think of the middle tier application serving, dominated by 4- and 8-way SNPs, you really think of the set of core applications. Many of those applications work today well on Linux. Some don't, but Linux matures day by day, and workload by workload, those things are ready. There are some parts of the middle tier, data serving, where things today, if customers are running 24, 32-way SMPs with huge databases, and they're looking at downtime, how many minutes of downtime they may have in a year. They require, HA failover. Maybe they have 1,000 concurrent users. Those are things for which Linux is not yet ready. And they are things for, however, that will be required in the future on-demand universe. Now, on-demand is an IBM term for virtualization, et cetera. But all the vendors are talking the same language. HP, Sun, Microsoft, everybody is looking at the IT environment of the future is different. And it's different in some fundamental ways. It's different in that, and the grid is really the first instantiation of this, that there is a fundamental, we've broken apart applications and customer needs from physical resources. And the virtualization layer in the middle provides the connectivity and provides so users don't care where applications run. They don't care what architectures they run on. They don't care what storage they use. All they care is that their application uses their data, gets results back to them. And Linux is perfect for this environment. It already provides. So any of the grid middleware, any of the software that is part of this translation between applications and physical resources has to run everywhere. The only operating system that runs everywhere is Linux. It's the only operating system that you can guarantee will run on processors that haven't even been invented yet. Is Linux. So it takes a huge amount of work out of this system and provides a huge amount of flexibility into the system. The fact that Linux runs on. So at this bottom view of the world can be Intel architecture, can be AMD, can be Power, can be PA RISC, can be TiVos, it can be mainframes from and so Linux is now every operating system will be represented here and is represented today, whether it's AIX or Solaris or HPUX or Windows, Linux, BSD. But over time, the fact that Linux already runs everywhere, the fact that it's the same everywhere, will simply make it easier for this to spread in a Linux universe and vice versa. So, I think I'll just, and so actually this universe looks a lot more complicated. And this is a real view of a grid architecture, and I won't go through this, and you shouldn't try to either. At the bottom, you'll see all the different IBM or IBM-reliant operating systems, Windows, Linux, OS 400, AIX, ZOS, et cetera, in a relationship with all of our different hardware, et cetera. Linux makes this whole stack easier. This whole stack's up one, and this is where the future is. And if you talk to HP, talk to Sun, you talk to Microsoft, they got the same vision. But when you talk to HP and IBM and Intel, et cetera, Linux simplifies this vision, and there's the direct correlation for the future. So I'm going to go to questions. Now, I'll just tell you in advance, I can't answer any questions about the lawsuit, so don't even bother, right? But anything else? Anything in terms of what we do, Linux in the industry, Linux and IBM? Yes, sir.
So how far away do you think this grid computing exactly is going to be?
Well, the grid on Linux today. There are large computational grids in operation in Europe and the US. Largely, it's for the high-performance computing community, national laboratories, universities. You don't see grids in the petroleum industry yet, right? But you will in the next couple of years. And so it's like Linux. It's not, one day you're not going to turn on a worldwide grid. You're going to build incremental grids with incremental workloads, new communities day by day. So it's both today and the future, if that's weaselly enough.
It's mostly like custom, very focused, narrow, scientific research area.
Yeah.
Got it. So when are we going to see, or what's our expectation that when we're going to see, like your Fortune 1000 rolling it out?
Well, the Fortune 1000s won't roll it out. The Fortune 1000s will buy time from grids, right? And they are already doing so in limited deployments. You buy time from an IBM grid that sits behind the IBM firewall, an on-demand solution, or you do it from HP, et cetera. They're not yet running their businesses on those. They're, not their core, most mission critical, but they are offloading, many of their workloads today. So those engagements are starting today, and by the Fortune 1000s. They've got a lot of the money.
What sort of challenges did you have to overcome to kind of adopt the open source development philosophies and approaches in your lab in what I view as a traditional corporate environment like IBM?
You view IBM as traditional? Conservative? No, come on. No. It actually was, unfortunately, it was easier than you would think. I mean, I don't have a long list of war stories that, the senior executives who started looking at this in '98 said, well, of course, right? So this makes a lot of sense. The mission they gave us was to go figure out how to participate successfully in open source. But we had quite a bit of freedom to do that. It was real basic. We took world-class IBM software developers. We educated them about open source. Mandatory reading, Cathedral and Bazaar. Mandatory reading, Voices from the Open Source Revolution. And we gave them a set of rules. Any community you're going to start with, you'll lurk for 60 days. We talked to them about the culture, et cetera. We told them to start at the bottom. And by and large, most of them became successful. Turns out it's not for everybody. Some people don't like to work in open source, even if they think they do. But it was not that difficult. Although I'll tell you one story. I was working for a VP at one point, trying to explain the power of open source and how we leverage it. And the VP said, okay, so you mean, I see how IBM can make money off of Linux or something like that. So the instruction I was given, so I was asked this question, so are you following all open source projects? I said, no. And all right, so I want next week a list of all open source projects that we're going to follow and see how they mature. Right? So at that point, SourceForge was in the early days, only had about 20,000 projects. So what I brought back was of course just the scope of open source, the number of projects running, et cetera. I never got that question again, but it was not. My memoirs wouldn't sell because there are not enough interesting stories about it being difficult in the corporation.
One thing you haven't talked about, I'm curious if IBM envisions playing at all. There's a trend people talk about ubiquitous computing, which is basically embedded and sort of invisible computation sort of surrounding us and embedded devices, et cetera, which is sort of, it's sort of the low end of the hardware
Yep.
spectrum. Does IBM envision doing anything there?
Yes, and the reason I don't talk about it is Linux is already good enough for that space. So I'm not investing to make Linux better in that space because it's done, right? So I don't talk about it, but absolutely, in most of those ubiquitous devices will be either Linux or Windows, right? Linux, so the embedded space is much more fractured than the server operating space. There's 300 or so operating systems, of which 20% are Unix, and everybody's fragmented. You're already seeing consolidation in the OS space for that ubiquitous computing model around Linux. Linux is just a natural. You strip off a bunch of stuff. You need the kernel. You need 20 or 40 other packages, depending on the application. It's very tight. It doesn't have a large footprint. It's easy to use. It's cheap. Linux is already there. So I don't talk about it enough because it's already good enough. Hasn't required IBM's investment to help make it better. So lots of people use it. So.
It seems from, I guess, what I read about the last Microsoft conference, what they're looking for is a system where desktops will continue to be where people get most of their computing, and they would provide more services to synchronize or get data from the internet, but continue to rely more and more on the processing power of the desktop. And what you're talking about with your on-demand seems to be more like a mainframe kind of a setup where you're going back to the time-sharing model.
So the question is, is it going to be client? Is it going to be server? No, the universe is too complicated for any one thing. It's too complicated for a single programming model. It's too complicated for a single hardware architecture. It's too complicated for a single operating system. It's too complicated for a single enterprise. I mean, this debate between glass house and distributed computing is irrelevant. You need both. The on-demand model is not a mainframe model. It can be a big house somewhere with lots of servers and applications go in and jobs come out, et cetera. It can be, however, just the fact that you've consolidated your department servers in a particular room. The applications move back and forth between those. Maybe it's simply it's the office applications behind your portal, because you've gone with a thin client, et cetera. It's more general. And you're just seeing through my eyes. I think of this in terms of the server space, but Microsoft is not wrong. Much of the computing will continue to be served by the desktops. Those desktops will continue to evolve, though. That you won't put big, fat desktops with all Office functionality on every desktop. You will evolve on-demand computing models in clusters, small departmental clusters of clients with little on-demand clusters behind them. So you can get more efficient use of your hardware. So they're different. It's almost like a different filter in terms of how you look at it. We're not really in conflict in terms of there are different interpretations, yeah, but the world is moving on. So.
What are you planning to do with regard to building digital rights management in one operating system? How does that affect the project tonight?
I actually don't know the answer to that. So obviously that's a hot topic. There's lots of different interests, and I don't know. I mean, so clearly IBM cares a great deal about intellectual property. We also care about the needs of our customers, and our customers, come on different sides of these type of debates. I mean, we're a large company. We work with everybody. We work and compete with everybody. I am not an expert on that topic. I do know we are following the industry and working with the industry to make sure we have the right solutions. But I don't know in a more detailed answer, and I apologize. So, yes, sir.
You mentioned at the beginning that IBM likes to both contribute to the open source community and then sell proprietary products on top of that.
Yep.
When you begin a project with IBM, how do you decide whether it's going to be an open source project or something you're going to try to sell?
We argue about it. So we have a process that I helped start 4 years ago that looks at that So in the early days, we had lots of teams come forward and say, we want to open source stuff. And ask them why. And say, well, it's cool. Right? So we force teams to think about their business strategy, their technical strategy, legal implications. Do you have the rights to the code, et cetera? Technical competence. Can you build a community? Open source without a community is just software sitting on a website somewhere, right? But you also look at what it is you want to do in business. You can use open source aggressively. You can use it to disintermediate competition. You can use it to set a new open standard. You can use it to commoditize something that wasn't commodity before. So what we have found is that there is no template for that decision. You have to look at a number of different elements of business strategy. Can you derive profit? Is there competing open source? Will people pay for what, differentiation? But also community. It just does you no good to go open source for something for which you can't form a community. Open source costs money for development teams. It is not, if you got code and you're going to get it ready to open source and you're going to build a community and you're going to support a community, you're going to put it online, that takes money. You have to be able to recoup that investment by getting community buy-in, by people helping out, by people, you have to be able to get business advantage. So we haven't found a formula. We have made that decision many, many times. Occasionally have gotten it wrong, obviously, but sometimes we've gotten it right. And I agree with, I don't know if you're here for Matt's talk, Martin Fink's book talks a little bit about that, but that's an area for which a book is not likely to be written anytime soon, because some of those exact arguments we would consider proprietary in terms of, there's business advantage in thinking about where open source is valuable and where commercial software is valuable. It's a fascinating topic, though. I've been trying to get the academic community more interested in this topic, and there's some work going on. Harvard Business School and some of the other business schools, Stanford. So. What else? Okay, thank you.